Imagine holding a small 12-volt battery in your hand. It can power a flashlight, charge a small device, or light a bulb. But what if you needed thousands of volts instead of just 12? How can a low voltage be converted into a much higher voltage? The answer is a device called an ignition coil. From the outside, it looks like a simple cylinder or box. Inside, it converts low voltage into high voltage using two coils of wire, an iron core, and a changing magnetic field. To understand how this works, we first need to look inside the ignition coil. An ignition coil contains two separate coils of copper wire wrapped around the same iron core. The first coil is called the primary coil, and the second is called the secondary coil. You can think of them as two long copper wires wound around the same metal center. Although they are close together, they are not directly connected. Instead, they interact through a magnetic field. The iron core is an important part of the ignition coil. Iron allows magnetic fields to pass through it easily, helping to concentrate the magnetic field produced by the coils. This makes the ignition coil more efficient than it would be without the iron core. Now let's follow what happens when electricity enters the ignition coil. Electricity from the battery flows through the primary coil. As electrons move through the many turns of copper wire, a magnetic field forms around the wire. A magnetic field is a region where magnetic forces can act. Although it cannot usually be seen, it is produced whenever electric current flows through a conductor. Imagine wrapping hundreds of loops of wire around an iron rod. As electric current flows through each loop, every loop produces its own magnetic field. Because the loops are wound in the same direction, these magnetic fields combine into a single magnetic field around the iron core. Increasing the number of turns in the coil increases the strength of the magnetic field. As long as current continues flowing through the primary coil, the magnetic field remains around the iron core. During this time, energy is stored in the magnetic field. You can compare this to stretching a spring. As the spring is stretched, it stores energy. In the same way, the magnetic field stores energy while current flows through the primary coil. The high voltage is not produced while the magnetic field is building. It is produced when the magnetic field rapidly collapses. Understanding how this collapse creates high voltage is the next step in explaining how an ignition coil works. So, what happens next? The ignition coil has built a magnetic field around its iron core, and that field is storing energy. Simply maintaining the magnetic field will not produce a high voltage. High voltage is produced when the flow of electricity through the primary coil is interrupted. As soon as the current stops, the magnetic field can no longer be maintained, so it collapses. You can compare this to stretching a rubber band and then letting it go. As it returns to its original shape, it releases the energy stored in it. In a similar way, the collapsing magnetic field releases the energy that was stored while current flowed through the primary coil. As the magnetic field collapses, it passes across the second coil wrapped around the same iron core. This second winding is called the secondary coil. Although the primary and secondary coils are not directly connected, the changing magnetic field creates a voltage in the secondary coil. This process is called electromagnetic induction. The principle is straightforward. When a magnetic field changes around a coil of wire, it induces a voltage in that coil. The voltage produced in the secondary coil is much higher than the battery voltage because of the number of turns of wire. The primary coil usually contains a few hundred turns, while the secondary coil contains thousands of turns wrapped around the same iron core. Each turn contributes to the induced voltage. Because the secondary coil has many more turns, the induced voltage is increased. As a result, a 12-volt battery can produce an output of 20,000, 30,000, or even 40,000 volts at the ignition coil. The ignition coil does not create additional energy. Instead, it transfers the energy that was stored in the magnetic field into a high-voltage electrical pulse. The total energy remains the same, but the voltage increases while the current decreases. This is the same principle used in transformers. After the voltage is increased, it leaves the ignition coil through the high-voltage output terminal. The cycle then begins again. Current flows through the primary coil, rebuilding the magnetic field. When the current is interrupted, the magnetic field collapses and another high-voltage pulse is produced. This process repeats continuously while the ignition system is operating.